calling the Marvin Planning Board meeting of January 21st, 2025 to order. We have a, quorum, thank you. The word just went right out of my head. We have a quorum. We are missing Ken, and I don't believe that he will be joining via Zoom.
He said he would try, but we will see.
Okay.
If he joins, you guys can just make a motion to allow him to participate.
When he does, okay. Perfect. So we have to adopt the agenda. As of today, we need to adopt the agenda. So could I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
So moved. And adoption of the previous minutes. Anyone have any questions, changes, comments? Then
I'll make a motion that we adopt the meeting minutes as presented.
Just to note, that is minutes from November 19th
Previous, yes.
and minutes saying that the December meeting was canceled.
so noted. All right, and so all in favor? Aye. All right, so moved. We do not have anyone online, I believe, and no one in the, no. Oh, it can only be in person. Oh, sweet, okay. So we don't have anyone in the gallery, so we will move on from public comment and head right into items of discussion. Milady, take it away.
She's in the hot seat.
Hi, everybody. So as you all saw in your agenda, we have a new soon to be adopted, tentatively, suggested procedures for rules of local government. This was done through the 2020 edition by Trey Allen and A. Fleming Bell II, and it was used as a guide for how our rules for boards should be updated. While most of the rules stay within the same understanding, there's just a couple of changes that I'll go over with you. Our biggest change is that during a motion, a second will no longer be required. So that saves us like 6 minutes. Next, we'll be adding a consent agenda. Sometimes. And this is usually a grouping of items that are approved in one motion that are non-controversial in nature or that need no discussion. This won't appear on the agenda unless there are items to be approved by consent. And then the next one is that the board actually had a previous consent agenda when the board adopted the text amendments to be consistent with North Carolina General Statute 160D. And the next one is items of discussion are now being replaced with unfinished and new business. That's what it will be called. The board is able to hold public hearings, though we rarely have cases as such, but we are able to hold them. The rules of procedure also adopt the council's rules for public comment periods and public hearings. You'll see those kind of like in the appendixes, I think. And then these rules of procedure will not apply to the Board of Adjustment. They will have their own separate rules, and we will have a separate meeting with that following. So yeah, we basically just wanted to update them and modernize them a little bit. And I would just ask you guys to look over them. It's really short, not too bad, and you'll feel really good about yourself because you'll know most of it. Yeah, and if you have any questions, you can bring them now or to the next meeting. Thank you.
The consent, you said the consent, we won't always have a consent agenda? Like, what is the difference between our current agenda and a consent agenda?
So the council has a consent agenda. It's where it's a grouping of items that are non-controversial in nature, and then someone moves to approve the consent agenda as presented. Those items are then approved with no discussion. You guys very, very rarely.
I see what you're saying.
You guys
Okay, I
very
gotcha.
rarely ever have one of those. They're in your rules of procedure, so you have it in your toolkit. You really won't have it unless we're doing a lot of text amendments, usually that are required by the state. When you all adopted your text amendments with 160D, we had one that was like 30 items long. It was all word changes and things that the state mandated us to do by a certain deadline.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. All right, so we actually need to make a motion to repeal and replace the Planning Board Rules of Procedure as presented, unless anyone has any discussions or additional questions. All right, so if there are none, if someone would like to make a motion,
Go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and make a motion to repeal and replace the planning board rules of procedure as presented.
and we still have to second until.
You will second
until
through
they
this
go into
meeting.
effect. All right, and all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so moved. Well, is it now in effect, or does it have to?
I will take it as it's in effect now.
So we
yes.
don't have to second it?
You don't have to second anymore.
All right. There it is.
I will change that in the background.
All right, moving on. Discussion and recommendation of zoning map amendment application 2025-1.
Okay. So the village has received a rezoning application to rezone the two parcels located at 9709 Marvin School Road. It's encompassing roughly 7 acres of property to be rezoned from rural residential to single SFR1. So this process will obviously follow the typical rezoning process outlined in 5.3 of the MDO. Planning board is reviewing this tonight, and you guys can make a recommendation to either recommend approval to council, to not recommend approval. And at the same time, this is the first review. It is up. The board can, if they have further questions or is not ready to make a recommendation, they do not have to tonight. With that being said, it is a pretty straightforward rezoning. This property was originally identified when planning board recommended the MDO to the village council back in April of last year. This property was designated as SFR1. That was because at the time, the property owner was, had a minor subdivision application in place and was going through getting that platted. He then, was that a phone?
Sorry,
Oh,
that's mine.
no worries. I was just like, he then basically pulled his application and was thinking of going through of rezoning for a further district, SFR 2 or 3, after the adoption of the MDO. However, at the time of the adoption with the MDO, there was a couple properties that did get revised, per se. There were a few things that planning board and staff didn't catch. There was 2 or 3 parcels that should have been either SFR 1 or RR or vice versa after it left planning board. So during council's adoption in May, they approved the MDO and the zoning map with about 6 properties zoning changes. One of those was the Vickery property that you guys considered or reviewed back in September of last year. This was another one. With that being said, the owner then submitted an application for rezoning from RR to SFR1. So that's what is in front of you today. Once again, SFR1, the biggest change is really the acreage of the minimum lot size for the property. The owner does have intent to subdivide the property, and I believe in your packets was included a site plan of that. That site plan has not been fully reviewed by staff, but you're not considering the subdivision, you're considering the rezoning tonight. If the rezoning does then get approved, then per the MDO, the property owner would be allowed to go through the major or minor subdivision process, which would be administratively. The planning board or council does not make any approvals with that, but it does still come to you guys for like recommendations per se. Any questions on that?
So are we just looking at the red areas, the 2 red areas, or are we looking at?
Do you make sure your microphone?
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. So are we just looking at the red?
In the memo? Yes. Yes, those are the 2 parcels that is a part of this rezoning request.
Okay, are any of these, I did look at the layout, I probably need to go back to that, hold on a minute. I have a question about whether or not any of the homes that are built there will be having driveways that are facing Marvin School.
Like I said, the subdivision plat that is in your guys' packets is a preliminary sketch plan. And staff has not fully reviewed it, and therefore I can't say for a certain. If it goes through if it were to be rezoned and go through the major subdivision process, the preliminary plat construction documents still come to planning board for review and recommendation, like feedback, I think is the way we kind of classified it, because you guys aren't making a motioned recommendation, but at least it gives, you know, as we discussed when we were going through the adoption of the MDO, it gives planning board a chance to, one, be in the know of what's kind of going on and coming through the development pipeline, but on two, there's things that sometimes you guys catch or see that staff doesn't always think about or stuff regarding sometimes driveway and stuff. The short end of that answer would be, it's probably going to be up to DOT.
Wait, say that again? It's probably going to be what?
Would be up to DOT regarding driveway access. So if the plat, or the preliminary plan in your guys' packet was to be what would be proposed as a subdivision if rezoned, and then therefore being reviewed by staff, then therefore he would also be submitting that to outside agencies, DEQ, NCDOT, and so on. Most likely, it would be some type of maybe shared driveway. That's something that DOT has kind of been pushing, even on minor subdivisions recently. They did it with the gates, they did it with the 3 lots off of Marvin Road, because they like to limit driveway cutout access, especially on major thoroughfares. And there is some reasoning behind that from safety and everything, so.
Especially with a school.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
So, I said that would then be fully determined if the subdivision, like I said, if the property's rezoned, the property owner then submits for subdivision, and then that would be reviewed by staff and DOT for those comments.
So I have a couple of questions, and some of them are not necessarily, you know, I know that we don't allow HOA rules to determine our rulings, but because there are 2 private roads involved, like, everyone knows that I don't like taking RR and making any smaller than it has to be. I understand the situation with this particular property, but before we go down this route of a minor major subdivision, is there a way to find out whether or not NCDOT will even allow driveways onto Marvin School? Or does this owner have permission to add additional homes that will then eventually come out onto these private roads?
Regarding the second part of that question, like CCNRs, private roads, and so on, the ordinance does allow for newly created lots to be platted on new private roads. Or not new private roads, existing private roads. Regarding the legality of those private roads and so on is on for the property owner. It's a civil thing between the property owner/developer and whoever owns the road or HOA and what their covenant states. So therefore, meaning, yes, that is something for the village to consider and be aware of. My understanding is that there are potentially CCNRs here, but the legality of them because of being defunct and all that, I don't know. Once again, that would be something that an individual property owner and or a group of those HOA homeowners would have to file in civil court with the current property owner. But that's something that we can't really take into consideration as part of our decision. Regarding the DOT thing, yes, that's something that staff can reach out and go ahead and get some preliminary comments on. However, once again, you're considering the rezoning, not necessarily the subdivision. I know that the subdivision would come if the rezoning, so it's hard to still separate the two. But at the same time, you're approving what could be from a zoning standpoint, meaning minimum of a 34,900 square foot lot with those minimum setbacks and so on.
Do you know if the cul-de-sac lots meet the 50-foot setback?
Like I said, I have not reviewed,
Because I'd like to know that too.
so it was.
Should go first. I mean, I know there's a procedure. I mean, should we wait for more information? There's questions from the board that are unanswered, and we can't really make an informed decision without the answers to these questions. I mean, what's the proper channel or the proper chronology of who should do what first on these kind of things?
So this is, like I said, kind of a newer process for you guys. You know, it's one of these things where you're looking at it from a land use decision, meaning allowing the zoning to change that they would be, in theory, obviously be able to develop it further than what it currently is. So that's one part of this decision. The second part is, yes, like in some rezonings, like I said, the other thing apart about this is that the site plan you see is not tied to the rezoning.
Say it again,
The site plan that you see is not necessarily tied to the rezoning. That is with the way the property lays out, and we had the same conversation with the Vickery property, and rough yieldage of acreage and lot widths and so on, I mean, the maximum yield from the 2 current parcels would be an additional 5 for 7 total lots. There's no other way that he would get more unless he was requesting this rezoning to be to SFR 2 or 3. So that's then one part of the equation that you guys are then considering is the maximum kind of yield. It also can, not for certain always say yield that. It could be other factors regarding stormwater, water sewer access, driveway access, all that stuff that then goes into play when you get to when the property owner wants to subdivide. So
So it sounds like our real job here tonight is do we approve a 7-acre parcel into 7 1-acre parcels?
I don't see how
In
we can
theory.
though I mean, because how can we do that if we don't know if it
But-
meets the setback?
But that's what I'm saying, you're not approving the subdivision. If the rezoning gets approved, then those lots have to comply with the minimum SFR 1 lot dimensions.
So,
There's a lot to go, even if we do,
Yeah.
there's a lot of heavy lifting still to happen,
Correct.
even if we say yes to 7 parcels.
so, and what,
Second look at this, I'm sorry.
yes, no, sorry. And off of that, my concern really is that, you know, we say yes to us, if we were to say yes to a 7 acres going down to 7 parcels, we don't even know if a minor or major subdivision could even happen in this space. And then we've just taken a rural residential plot and turned it into more, to me, it just doesn't, so I totally hear what you're saying, but I would vote no until someone could prove to me that they have all the legal, like, everything is, in line. Like, I would be more apt to consider it if I knew that they had all of the, like, their ducks in a row, so.
And that is completely, so, well, one, you can't necessarily, so you guys have to, not necessarily this meeting, but per the MDO, you guys have basically the first meeting and then 2 consecutive meetings after that. So in theory, 3 meetings to make a recommendation on a submitted rezoning request, unless the applicant requests a extension but like if this applicant or any applicant doesn't request it, then you guys legally have to make that recommendation within the 3-meeting timeframe. However, let's say you make your recommendation to not approve it, or the recommendation to approve fails, however legally clerky words it, and it goes to council. These are the same questions and things that council will have when they're considering these rezoning requests, if it's this one or anything in the future. And they have a right to not approve something and leave it at that. I mean, I've seen rezonings that they give you the detail like you see, and what you see is potentially what this applicant is going to do, where that's what you see. But then at the same time, and I think I mentioned this with the Vickery property, it's like you still have to then remember, once they get the zoning, like i.e. if the property owner, or not this property, let's just say a property was coming for SFR 2 or 3, and they were doing it to flex the maybe lot size, or sorry, like lot width and such, but not trying to maximize yield. But then, once they had the zoning, they could, in theory, still maximize yield if they put in a road or something like that. And so they, that's a decision that you guys have to weigh, and same thing for council. So it's going to take some learning, because like I said, this is something kind of new, especially from a conventional rezoning standpoint. So it is up kind of to the board to kind of, yes, ask those questions. Legally, the property owner doesn't have to say that he's rezoning it for this, but everybody has an opinion and kind of can take, like I said, you're reviewing it from a zoning standpoint on what the current zoning language gives you or gives the property owner, and what that district that they're requesting to be, what they're getting out of it.
And you think that this is in line with the land use plan, even though when you look at everything around it, like the neighborhood that it's in is not, it's all large parcels.
That gets me to I hate our land use plan, and
Yeah.
we need to update. But
Question, with the exception of one lot at the end of the street, it's already SFR1. I looked up on our zoning map.
Wait.
The one at the end of the street, at that little
That one, yes, there's one parcel that's right beside it that is zoned SFR1.
Which I guess was because it was too small to qualify as
for rural
RR
residential.
when we did it.
Yes. But this property is zoned rural residential. Like I said, it was recommended during the process of the MDO, when the planning board made that formal recommendation to council back in April. At the time, this property was designated SFR1. However, when the MDO got adopted, it was reverted to rural residential.
Okay, so sorry, so thank you, John, for that, because I'm just looking, just eyeballing it, so it looks like all larger pieces of property, so,
Like I said, there's that one up at the end of the street where on the same
So,
side,
Yeah, in the memo,
there's
like I
a
said,
notch in his property. That's a separate. And that's
Correct.
an SFR1.
correct, so there is SFR,
Yeah.
yes.
but all of the rest
The
of
rest
the
of 'em are,
properties
yeah.
are what?
So
RR.
RR,
well,
yeah.
when you're looking at it from the full property boundary, there's multiple current land uses and zoning districts here. Like I said, the subject property is rural residential. To the north of the property is rural residential. To the south is, depending on where you want to classify south, is SFR1, the 1 acre, the parcel there in the cul-de-sac. It abuts rural residential there to the south as well, across the cul-de-sac, as well as in abuts Union County R40 with, is that Ladera right here? Or Gates at Ansley? Which one is this? Yeah, Gates of Ansley. So, once again, kind of multiple districts and uses. And then on the east side is rural residential, and then on the west side is civic, and the use is civic for the school. So it is surrounded by a multitude of different uses and zoning districts.
But the neighborhood itself, if it's like one of the few rural residential neighborhoods left in Marvin.
So getting to that land use plan question, when you look at our land use plan and our future land use map, our future land use map has one color that says residential. Doesn't classify necessarily low, medium, high, doesn't any of that stuff. The land use plan also does have the goal and recommendation of the minimum lot size of an acre / 1 house per acre. So therefore, in theory, yes, it is consistent with those aspects of the plan. However, with the, something that, like I said, the goal for staff and as well as to be working with planning board is to update our land use plan and those goals and recommendations and update our future land use map. Because the best way to kind of do these things is like you have your holding district in rural residential and like the implemented regulations, the MDO. But then on the future land use map, you also can designate future land uses. You can differentiate on type of density or whatever. That's how most plans typically are. But like I said, ours just says residential. So, and the classification is really low density, which we classify in that land use plan as 1 house per acre. So,
Right, but the point of rural residential was to preserve the rural parcels. I mean,
well, that and to make it go through this process. Because if under the old ordinance, this would be in theory SFR1, and they would be able to go through the subdivision process, and all of that was by right. So that's where the rural residential, the rezoning is that legislative decision, that step that where planning board and council and the village kind of can control that development and growth, how they see fit, whoever, the elected body be or planning board. Because at the end of the day, at 2.5 acres, it's not going to necessarily be feasible for any developer in any parcel to develop it. So they're going to have to go through rezoning. And that's where, like, I think we talked about this with the adoption of the MDO. We're going to see a lot of, probably on average, 3 to 5 rezoning requests a year. Anything simple from rural residential to SFR1, or somebody come in wanting to really push the buttons, going from rural residential to SFR3 or SFR1 to SFR3, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that's the step in the process that the planning board and the council kind of control development.
In that spirit of the conversation that we're having, and I'm just asking you the legality of this, okay? You know, the more that I'm seeing this density housing that's going along all over the place, even if it's 1 acre, you know, it's just dense. It's like more people. Putting, you know, quite a lot of pressure on the school system. And it's like, you know, at some point, there has to be, like, for example, you see what's going on over at Ray Farms. It is absolutely out of control. This isn't this situation, but where are all those kids? Where are all those people going to be? I mean, it's just too much. So from a legal standpoint, even though everything fits, do we have the ability, council or the planning board, to say, you know what, it fits within the parameters of the land use plan, the MDO, we just don't want it anymore. Can you do that?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, it's a land use decision. So you guys, in theory, you're not, even though right now, like, we're talking about looking at it from a zoning perspective. What are the lot sizes? What are the uses and so on? You still then take into consideration what is the impact of the potential land use is going to have on other factors that maybe the village doesn't control. We don't have control over what the school board does or meeting those needs for that. We don't have control over water, sewer, infrastructure, and the demands or that. Those are school board and Union County. Same thing with roads sometimes, DOT. However, that's where the land use decision of a rezoning is very important, because those things, I'm not even going to say in theory, can be kind of discussed and considered when, I mean, those are all questions planning board can ask, council can take into the consideration. Now, if you do not approve a rezoning, I'm not saying this one, as we kind of discussed, don't say for what reasons why you're not approving it, just let it be. But those can still be a part of your discussion. So.
But can we get sued if somebody turns around and says, wait a minute, I'm doing everything that you're saying I can do. You're just not letting me do it. I'm just asking.
That, as Rick said, that's where if you guys, council in specific, would make the motion to approve, nobody has to vote to approve it, and you don't have to say why. You only have to justify consistency or inconsistency with the land use plan when you're approving something, not when, you still can say you're not approving it because it's inconsistent or with those reasons, but that does potentially open you up for, wouldn't necessarily a lawsuit, but potentially for them to appeal the decision. So, you know, like I said, it just comes with the council making sure that the motion's the right way and then cuts it at that. But that's, you know, talking about schools, water, sewer, like, that's where land use plans, when you look at other municipalities, even if they don't have some of that, that control, they don't, you know, obviously, maybe it's a county school board, but those municipalities, in their land use plans, typically they have that data and feedback from those entities that goes into the plan, and then also then derives some of the goals and recommendations, but it kind of gets in there. To my knowledge, I think ours has our demographics, and it doesn't really have maybe much on school, like current school, what's the word I'm looking for? Current capacity at the schools, and current capacity at, with water, sewer, and so on. But, and that's what does make it tough on the county, is that school board's not the one making the land use decisions. It's the Board of Commissioners, and it's the municipality elected body. So that's where, you know, it does benefit to kind of try to go hand in hand and think about this. On larger subdivisions or conditional zonings per se, you can require a traffic impact analysis study, you can require a school impact analysis study. So that does go into your land use decisions. With something like this specifically, like I said, I'll have to look and kind of maybe talk with Rick and some other municipalities on, do they require a TIA and school impact analysis study and stuff for, I mean, even for simple conventional rezonings, or if we can. Because like I said, that's where then subdivisions, we kind of did that under the old ordinance, but state statutes changed. the legislative rezoning is now the only kind of power you guys have.
And we also have two different elementary schools that we feed, so this would clearly go to Marvin because it's across the street. You can't pass one school, and you can't be rezoned past one school to get to another. That's just the law, so, okay. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
I will mention, like I said, so kind of finishing up my memo, looking at it from a simple land use kind of designation, the zoning district itself. It is recommended by staff to be approved. It's recommended that way because of the land use plan. However, that's just staff's recommendation. There are other factors, like I said, that I can't necessarily take in my staff report that planning board and council can consider. I can, if those questions regarding potential access and schools, I can try to reach out to the school board and DOT and then get some of those initial just preliminary concepts or comments based off the conceptual plan that's in your guys' packet to present at the next meeting. It's really kind of up to the board. And like I said, this is kind of a learning process. We'll have to potentially see ways to, like I said, there's different ways to do this when considering land use decisions. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Like I said, I've seen ordinances where it has certain thresholds based off the acreage for rezoning of what's required for, like I said, where then those TIAs and school impact analysis studies are then considered at that time. And I've seen them, fully required. It's just, you have to think about this when you're making the changes to the MDO for application submittals or what's required for rezoning. It then applies to anybody and everybody, meaning that you could have one little 2-acre tract or 2.5-acre tract that wants to subdivide for their son. I don't know, I'm just using this as a complete example, is that, well, then if we require X, Y, and Z for any rezoning, then they would be required to do the same. So that's something that staff can look into a little bit, but it's kind of up, how the board wants to proceed.
So, two more quick questions, sorry. So if, hypothetically, if this were to be approved, and then someone else within this neighborhood came up and said, now we want to subdivide down from RR to SFR1, we would then, to deny them would not be consistent because we just approved their neighbor.
Not necessarily. You're not setting precedent at all. I mean, if that's the case, then and I'm not doing this, I'm just using this as an example, I could argue that precedent was set when the Vickery property was rezoned.
But you told us that that was already in the process.
Zonings are tied to the
Correct.
specific property. Unless the greater character of the entire area around a property changes, you're not setting precedent. Rezonings are self-contained. Rezonings aren't necessarily going to affect the property next door.
Okay. And then my second question is, why do we not consider HOA rulings? Because, so in my rural neighborhood, we are not allowed to subdivide, and we would have legal action taken against us if we tried to subdivide. So, so what I don't understand is, and I know that the burden of proof should be on the applicant to show that they are actually legally able to do this within their neighborhood.
But it's not legal for you to consider that.
Say that again?
It's not legal for you to consider HOA.
Well, there is a yes and no answer here. In the ordinance, in the NDO in Article 1 specifically, it states that, the short way to put this, I don't have it, I can pull it up and read it verbatim if we want to, but it basically says that the Village of Marvin cannot enforce CCNRs. However, basically whatever, if the CCNRs are stricter or whatever, then the rule of thumb is that the most stricter rule applies. However, this is one reason with the MDO and doing the rural residential district, was something that staff wanted, and we talked about, with planning board, because what I was then seeing, if it was some of these rural residential neighborhoods coming from minor subdivisions, which all minor subdivisions, you recall, even though it was coming to you and council, still by right, there was nothing, you were setting yourself up terribly then if you were to not approve that compared to like a rezoning, because it's in the ordinance as a by right subdivision, minor or major. However, knowing that that HOA might have some type of covenant restriction that says a minimum acreage is 2 acres, and they're taking their 2 acre tract to 2 1 acre tracts. So with all that being said, once again, legally, we couldn't do anything then. We can kind of now. Yes, you don't really have to, how am I trying to say this? I'm not also trying to get us in trouble, but legally, we don't enforce those, but those are, I think, still conversations that can be either questions addressed to the applicant or that can be presented. Once again, if the applicant doesn't care to share that, I'm not saying just this applicant, just anyone, and same thing with any site plan and any future rezoning, that's kind of on them, meaning that they can say, we want to push, when I say push this through, go through, meet the deadlines that's in the MDO, has to make a recommendation by planning board and go to council for consideration. But council, once again, does not have to approve something. And if that information is not there, that can, said it's a roundabout way of the legality of it, but yes, that's stuff that can be asked and requested.
So can this whole thing be changed then?
What do you mean?
If it's rezoned, it doesn't have to be like this? It can change to something different?
Well, hold on. To clarify, if it's rezoned, it's only being rezoned to SFR1, which means that, yes, it can be changed in how their site is developed, but it still has to comply with the minimum lot size and setbacks of SFR1. It doesn't mean that they can then, if they wanted to be rezoned to SFR2, 3, or whatever district, they would have to then go through another rezoning process.
So so we could vote, up or down, or we could ask for, say we're not ready to vote because we want additional information.
Yes, you can
And then
take,
we can request that we see additional information, correct?
I'm trying to figure out if I want to legally say you can request or strongly recommend
Or
that
we
you
can
would
just say, these are, well, maybe.
strongly
not.
recommend that the applicant provide this information.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the safety with regard to whatever, if there's a hazard, because the school's right across the street. That's my concern.
What other information are we going to ask him for then?
I think we've got concerns about,
Where the ingress and egress would be on Marvin School Road is one
yes,
concern.
and
But that, with rezoning, right? That's my concern as well.
See, this is what I don't get. So if it's black and white with rezoning, but then if we have an issue with RR versus SR1,
R1.
are we not allowed to take that into consideration? Because I thought we were.
Well, and really, it's about road access, just period, because it's not even just NCDOT and Marvin School, it's also private roads being added. What's the legality there?
And who has to pay for it?
Well, the private road already exists right now.
Right.
So if they were to take this forward and go to a minor subdivision, then they're going to have to be more minor road within the subdivision or the minor
Well,
subdivision.
in the memo, I outline, if approved, once again, the property in theory can be subdivided and at high level, the difference between a major and minor. In theory, this would be classified as a minor. However, if they are extending public water and sewer, which we don't know, if they extend any type of public infrastructure like that, even though it's under the threshold to be a minor subdivision, that triggers a major. Same thing if you're installing a road. So when it comes to a minor subdivision, it is more an abbreviated process. That does not come to you guys at all anymore. And like I said, what staff would do is basically, if it were to be rezoned, and let's just say this plan is what is then submitted, staff would review it to make sure all 5 of the newly created lots, or I mean, it's 7 showing, but it would be 5 new lots, that all the lots comply with the minimum lot requirements in SFR1. That includes minimum lot size, lot width, setbacks are one thing, like obviously lot width is minimum of 130. It can be smaller at the road, but then has to be a minimum of 130 feet at the 50 feet back per the MDO. But at the end of the day, let's say it all then, how am I trying to say this? Let's say they all comply with that, and in theory, at 130 feet wide of a lot, you're gonna meet setback requirements. But if for some reason, if they, like a weird lot, that's on them, that they just created like it's a conforming lot, but it's not buildable. Like if they were to craft it out where it wouldn't perk or something like that, depending on the site, like that's where a lot of this is on the property owner and future developer. Like if it's not to have sewer, then they have to go get it perked, design their septic systems, and then typically that sometimes goes into how they design or craft the lots. So,
So it sounds like you're just telling us to focus on whether this 7-acre parcel can be rezoned parcel. That other information will come later on when they come back. The job tonight is just, this 7-acre be down to 7 1-acres.
that's the simplest way to put it, but like I said, those other land use impacts.
They'll come later.
But how do you make a decision?
Correct.
Why would you want to subdivide if later on you find out that there are so many challenges that now you've subdivided and it's done?
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
you
like I
just
said,
lost the whole residential.
there is pros and cons to what goes into your guys' land use decision, but ultimately, like, the impact on schools and other stuff like that can go into your guys' land use decision.
Well, let me ask another question, because shouldn't the neighborhood meeting potentially have come first? Because there's 9 other homes on there who may say, no, I don't want more traffic on my private road. And that would make our decision a little bit more.
So the MDO, like I said, and this is completely within the planning board's right to table the decision tonight. It's not, there's nothing stopping you until after the neighborhood meeting. All that basically does state in the MDO is that the neighborhood meeting has to be held before the legislative hearing. So if future application were to be submitted, and this applicant's already scheduled their neighborhood meeting, notices have already went out. But let's say they submit an application and it goes to planning board and they don't have their neighborhood meeting scheduled yet. Well, in theory, based off of timing and everything, they're gonna have to schedule it technically before whatever planning board meeting, then to meet criteria, then to be on the council's meeting for the legislative hearing. So it's still similar with this one, even though, because the submittal was last week. And we already had a light agenda, so I wanted to go ahead and get this in front of you. But once again, you guys can table the decision until the neighborhood meeting, get the neighborhood meeting report, and then that can go into your guys' recommendation.
All right, so is the consensus then to table until we hear from the neighborhood, get the report for the neighborhood meeting?
Table it to the next meeting. The neighborhood meeting is Thursday, November 4th or 6th. I didn't get these dates backed up.
February, you mean?
February, what did I say, November?
November.
Sorry, guys, it has been a day.
Yeah, that's better.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, let me just check my calendar. It's also it's in here. So, yeah, the neighborhood meeting will be here at Village Hall on Thursday, February 6th, from 6 to 8 p.m. Planning board can come and attend and listen. At the same time, if you can't make it or don't want to attend, the meeting report will then be provided for you at your February meeting. The only thing I will make a note of, which has nothing to do with your guys' decision, it's really them pulling me. If you guys make a recommendation at the February meeting and it goes to council in March, I will be in Hawaii, so I will not be able to be at that public hearing. That's another reason why I did want to,
Go to what?
I will not be there for the council meeting to present this at the public hearing, if it's in March. 6 hour to 7 hour, whatever difference, but,
He's in Hawaii, he better not be here.
but that's another reason why this was put on the agenda, because it is a conventional rezoning. When I say a very simple, straightforward request, like from a just zoning standpoint, yes, not necessarily a land use decision, but just if, if the planning board was ready to make their recommendation tonight, then that, yes, helped me out, but at the same time, you guys have, it's outlined in the MDO, you guys have a right to table it, and a decision just has to be made. I want to say it's like 40, it's the way it's structured out, it's basically the next, the March meeting at the absolute latest. They don't have to,
I would recommend that you make a motion to defer consideration until the next meeting,
All right, I'm
The
going to
next
make a motion
regularly
to defer
scheduled meeting.
consideration to the next meeting then,
regularly scheduled meeting.
to our regularly scheduled meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. See, that didn't even ask for a second. Broke the seal. All right. All right, Board of Adjustment training.
so I wanted to keep this on there here. Obviously, we're not having a mock hearing tonight. I wanted to, this is maybe going to be something I'm going to continue to do, is try to just maybe it's just not just specifically to Board of Adjustment, but each month provide you maybe a link or something, a resource to the school of government, just for at your own leisure if you would like to read into. One of the things I wanted to point out is, I guess first let me ask, did the board have a chance to review either what's in the packet, the links that's in the packet today, or from the last meeting, and were there any specific questions to any Board of Adjustment quasi-judicial decisions?
I feel like that's a little bit more straightforward than what we just did.
Well, and that's why I ideally want to have a mock hearing in the future. We do have rezonings coming down the line, so planning board, we're going to be busy. But that's why I'm trying to provide you guys at least these guides and resources to just kind of look at. So, yeah, I mean, Board of Adjustment will only meet for 3 reasons. A special use permit application, which the special use permits are outlined in Article 8 of the MDO of what they are. For the most part, I don't believe, off the top of my head, there's really nothing unless a rezoning occurs, because the special use permits are the scary things. A variance, which most likely, or it's a very slim chance that you guys would see a variance, and that's because from a staff level, I'm going to recommend to that potential property owner or applicant 3 other things. One being, go through rezoning first, because rezoning is, in a way, not necessarily easier for them, but it does provide them a clearer kind of path. A variance in any quasi-judicial decision has to be based on fact. Even if whoever that property owner was wanted to do a variance first and it got denied, they could still apply for rezoning. So it doesn't really matter how it happens, but I would look at potentially rezoning. There's also Article 14, which is flexible development standards, which we had this discussion with the MDO and that percentage, but basically regarding setbacks and certain lot dimensional stuff, I have an administrative authority to grant a minor variance up to, it's roughly like 10% depending on what that is. Meaning that like the front setback for a property is 50 feet, but I'm actually going to use the Sage of Marvin for an example. There's if you guys recall the Sage of Marvin, there's that rural residential lots, the 3 that are around it. One of them is where the existing house was, where they ended up having to demo the existing house. Based off of the lot dimensions and the floodplain and other things, they were asking to potentially bring the house a little closer to the road, like basically a 40-foot setback. Once again, I gave them the option of either being rezoned to SFR2 or doing it at 45 because it provides them that flexibility. I still have to document it just as it would be if it was being kind of reviewed from a variance. It's just an administrative approval. I also have the authority, if I don't feel comfortable making that decision, to then request the applicant file a formal variance application and go to Board of Adjustment. But with that being said, it's still very unlikely just the way that Marvin is with the majority residential, pretty large lots, and the size, where it's all at, it's unlikely, but it could happen.
We've only had 3 variances in my tenure here.
So,
And 2 of them would be technically comply with the MDO now.
So I think my concern, or not a concern, but when you were talking about the quasi-judicial, where you need to do the evidentiary hearing, I'm not an attorney. Certainly in all my years of
We will have an
business,
attorney here.
there are
Yes.
questions that you ask, but I'm more concerned of what questions can we not ask
We will
during
have an
that.
attorney here during any formal hearings.
Okay.
Yep, so,
it's more of opinion, you can't, like, it's the comments, like, that's what I'm gonna have to
So,
control myself.
Yeah.
is the
right, so
comments,
we
you
don't
know,
make
like,
personal comments, we just ask fact-based.
yes, correct.
Just the
And
facts,
so-
sir.
Just the facts, ma'am.
That's why I also wanted to keep this on there. I know of a municipality that has a special use permit application that's been submitted. It's nowhere in Union County. This is just a colleague of mine. That is for a chemical industrial, or not a chemical. The property's own industrial. It's a chemical manufacturer. They've been operating there since like the 60s, whatever. And they have a settling lagoon, which is, yes, it sounds terrible, but at the same time, it's something that was permitted throughout this time and still in compliance, I think, with whatever EPA whatever regulations there are. Their request is to do an industrial landfill, basically to upfit that lagoon, put a liner, all that stuff to make it more environmentally friendly. With that being said, it sparked a lot of fun controversy in this town. And it got ramped up on social media and all this stuff. Over 400 people showed up to the evidentiary public hearing meeting, which in those resources I provided, like, technically only people with standing and factual testimony are the one that is supposed to speak and present. So with all that being said, you're seeing that this municipality is struggling with public opinion and perception. And I just want to like bring that awareness to you of like, if we were to have something, which once again, how the MDO is set up, it's unlikely because like use that heavy industrial overlay and then the special uses in that would require rezoning to industrial, rezoning to a heavy industrial overlay, then a special use permit. So there's 2 rezoning decisions that we can nip that way before it gets there. But just in the hypothetical chance that it ever does, like, you have to take it as you are the jury. You can't come into a potential, hearing with any type of predetermined or biased opinion. You have to take out public opinion. So if you have 30 people show up saying they don't want it,
Well, and that doesn't matter, because they're not even allowed to speak.
correct. It's got to
Only on
be,
what's presented.
now, and Austin, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but if something that the municipality can do in these cases, most of them and the ones like kind of straightforward, so staff acts as the qualified witness or, presenting kind of the application. However, if it's one of these that, for example, if it was an industrial landfill and the impacts on the environment, I'm not an expert there. The applicant obviously will hire their expert witnesses to provide that documentation. The village can hire or consult with an attorney and/or firm to inspect and/or provide their professional opinion. That then you could have 2 varying opinions, but at least you have 2 varying opinions to consider as part of your testimony or as part of your the evidence.
Correct. If there was any dispute over the qualifications of any witnesses, that would likely be dealt with in an appeal process, which would go to the courts and not here.
And if we were to make a decision, it's just an up or down with no explanations.
No.
You have to provide findings of fact.
Yeah, you have to provide findings of fact. It's complicated. You would essentially do very long motions explaining the rationale and how it's assistant.
Yeah, they're in Article 5, no, not 5, 7, I think it's 7, whatever, once again, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm sorry. In your packet, those procedures for variance, special use permits and stuff are outlined, Article 6. And with that being said, there is standard finding, like 4 typical things you're weighing. Impact on health, safety, welfare, surround, all that stuff.
Those are normally, and each finding of fact is normally done as a separate motion, and then there is, once all 4 motions have went through, then you go to the overall, I move to approve, and then it goes to a vote. All motions associated with variances require a 4/5 vote of the regular members of the Board of Adjustments. You have 5 members, you need 4 yeses for it to be approved.
And
So with all the evidence being presented, do you vote at that point? Because we might need time to go back and, just like if you're in a juror box.
trial,
yeah.
I need to go and I need to
So-
discuss and
Deliberate.
hash things out, yes.
There
thank
is
you.
no closed session, so that is public discussion. You would sit amongst yourselves, ask questions, you would deliberate.
In front of everybody.
Yes.
Correct. You,
Ta-
cases do have deadlines, so it's not something that you can keep, kick down the road.
Right, so
But we
I
could
thought maybe you
ask-
had like
Unless
5
it's,
days
once
to
again,
present our
unless it's
opinion.
requested by the applicant and you guys honor that request.
But we could also ask for additional information, correct? If
Correct.
something wasn't presented, which might then delay it because they'd have to go and get said information.
You can, but once again, it's going to be applicant dependent, meaning,
If the
Yeah.
applicant says no, you have to vote, up or down.
yeah. Now, with that being said, depending on what that information is, let's say you don't, there's information, I'm going to use what we just
On an
discussed.
alien landing pad and.
Impact on the environment, whatever. And they have presented testimony that says, hey, per EPA standard, whatever, what they're doing is currently compliant with EPA standards and what they're proposing is going a step above. However, there's still not misinformation, but information maybe you guys still have questions on that they can't answer. Then in your motion, it would be probably to not approve it, and you would state that the findings of fact are basically,
The motion would be to approve, and then it would be voted down. It needs to be
well,
motion needs
when
to
they're
be-
adopting, each findings of fact, they would state in the findings of fact that X, Y, and Z, is not provided sufficient information to, to make a determination on the impact of health. Like, you would kind of outline some of that stuff in your findings of fact. Because your findings of fact is, in theory, your land use that's kind of way, you're taking the evidence and putting it into what your findings are as a board.
So technical question, would we be using eScribe
Yes.
for this procedure?
Yes.
So if
Motions will be-
Austin was sitting there listening to our concerns and we were ready to make a motion, you could type up something that would be,
We would wordsmith it in real time. We would
Okay.
wordsmith it in real time to the board's satisfaction. My preference for any motion is that it is made in the affirmative. So if you feel like you have not received enough information on X subject, I would refer you say you have received enough information and then vote it down to say that you have not. The reason you always want to make motions in the affirmative is that if it goes to the court, there is no confusion over what a yes is and what a no is. Because if I vote to approve a motion to deny, the applicant could say they were confused by the process, someone could argue you all were confused by the process. It makes everything much cleaner.
so we were just talking about that earlier, because we did that at a previous meeting where we made a motion to approve and then most of us, I believe, voted it down.
Yes.
That's the proper
So
way to do it.
is that just for Board of Adjustments, or is that actually the procedure that we should be, that should just be best practice?
That is best.
Best practice.
Okay, all right.
I'm trying to think of anything else I was going to say. There was one thing that happened at a previous Board of Adjustment meeting that could happen again is you have multiple members have to recuse themselves for whatever reason. Their company has a relationship with the applicant's company, for example. That was the last one. We had one alternate missing, two regular members couldn't. Two regular members had to step down, they had to recuse themselves, so we only had 3 regular members and 1 alternate participating. So they had 4 votes minimum participating. They didn't have that 5th person. The applicant at that moment could have said, I don't want to proceed, I don't have a full board, and you all would have to honor that. That's one of the things.
And when it comes to
Does this, if they were to have voted, does that stand, even though they didn't have that, they didn't
as
have
long,
that
if they,
4/5?
all four people would have had, because it's still, that's 100%.
It's a 4/5 membership vote,
Oh, okay,
not,
that makes
not
sense.
4/5 present.
So, and that's why we have alternates. That's why, the way it was set up, now that planning board is the Board of Adjustment, there's two alternates, for situations like that. At the same time, you know, when it comes to questions of recusal, it's better to potentially, once again, disclose that when during the meeting, and the attorney can kind of maybe make that determination. And one of the previous variance cases, it was a very, very weird connection. Like, they didn't go into it with a, having to recuse. But then when reading the evidence presented or something like that, there was an email, and the company the applicant worked for does business with one of the board. And even though they didn't know each other, they still recused. So all because, like, it's, you know, your neighbor, at the end of the day, it's, can you make a fair and impartial decision? So.
You don't want that to be questioned either.
Yes. So, you know, that's kind of the other thing that comes into that. And that, you know, kind of going to your question of tabling it, ex parte communication so meaning that once the meeting's closed here and you guys table that decision, you guys can't go and get drinks and talk about it.
You guys can't meet with the applicant, people associated with the applicant. If anything were like that to happen inadvertently, you would need to disclose that when you return for the meeting. It's really important that alternates are at every Board of Adjustment meeting, because you don't know when they're going to be needed. Like that one, we had someone recused at the beginning, and then someone recused half the meeting, and then someone recused towards the end. So we ended up having to use every one we had.
Yeah. And this is exactly why the special use permits are the big, scary stuff. It's not like pools and side yards like that. I mean, because it is supposed to be like a court, it's supposed to be very formal. You're supposed to be looking at it from the impacts and the evidence being presented, and not necessarily a land use type decision. You know, if we ever get to a point where we have one, and I'm still here. I mean, I don't, once again, plan on going anywhere. I'm just, you know, once again, I don't know if and when. But, you know, as long as I'm staff here, I will provide you guys with, you know, my report, but I will also provide you kind of an outline of the meeting, certain things, like, I mean, to make sure, because I know it's, once again, you're not, my role in this is as technical staff. I'm representing the village in theory, but I'm still presenting to the board just if I was a applicant. So I would still provide you guys all that information, because all that information, the staff report, all that stuff can go into evidence for the decision. So, yeah, but like I said, just,
I feel like this is more, I think the Board of Adjustments is more straightforward than what,
It's a lot
I
less
still have
It's-
questions about when we're just doing zoning.
it's a lot, yeah.
What can we ask, what can we not ask, what can we consider, what can we not consider? I mean,
Well-
like, that's really where it's muddy and it's gray, and I could use a cheat sheet.
Yeah, and
Honestly.
that's where, like, yes, in theory, Board of Adjustment, it's black and white. It's straightforward. However, the biggest thing is you've got to then turn off that subjective questioning and thinking and put it in a way of fact-finding questions, and not let public opinion or subjectivity influence your decision. Where in normal land use decisions, yeah, you're still supposed to filter through some of that, but it's a lot more laid back per se. So, like I said, just want to keep giving you guys the resources, and I'll probably keep this on on the agenda, and give you, like I said, and I might do it in planners update or something, but just like kind of, once again, give you a resource if it's Board of Adjustment related, if it's land use related. Maybe the next one would be like, hey, what can planning board talk about in land use decisions? Just where you got, school government is great. I will say they're not always 100% like agreed with, because they're looking at it from the letter of the law or legal or court cases. Some of the stuff that they write on, and specifically like 160D, like some of the new land use changes, is their basically legal opinion of how to interpret stuff or how to do things. And that's just because there hasn't been court precedent. So, you know, you have to still filter through how the school government kind of guides you, but they are still a great guide and resource on this. And when it comes to Board of Adjustment stuff, they're pretty straightforward because there is court precedent that kind of sets that. But yeah. So,
Who's the chair of the Board of Adjustments?
That'll be for you all to decide. We would encourage you to match the leadership of both the planning board to the Board of Adjustment. So in theory, that would be you and Rich as the chair and vice chair, but the board would vote on that just like the planning board does.
So we don't get to share, we don't get to share the wealth. Just, it's like my national organization, I'm like, okay, I'm not chairing this committee again. I'll be your vice chair, but you got to chair it. I'm not chairing it again.
I said, and then the third one that we talked about, variance and special use permits, the third one's appeals. It's appeals of administrative decisions. So that could be, we'll use an example of either my interpretation of the ordinance and/or let's take this subdivision that we're just talking about. Let's say that it doesn't comply or staff, you know, based off of what's on the plat. This is maybe a terrible example because that's kind of straightforward, but they could technically appeal that decision to you guys. It's still similar to, you know, you're still weighing findings of fact. And that's why, like in a zoning determination letter or something like that, like I have to kind of put my justification on my interpretation. And any time I'm interpreting ordinances or have that gray area, and it was a lot more in the old ordinance, not necessarily now, I would always consult with our attorney, because at the end of the day, if I'm making a interpretation on something, I need to make sure that he agrees, because just in case it gets challenged. But that is the third kind of avenue that a Board of Adjustment would meet. So, any other questions on Board of Adjustment stuff? I would recommend, and something that we actually talked about with the department head staff meeting this morning, was that we're probably going to send you guys some potential training, courses, like once again at school, because they offer Board of Adjustment workshops and stuff, and potentially putting some in the budget for, you know, if there's a certain board member. I mean, it can be land use, it would be planning board land use type or this, but at least knowing that there's training available. And if you guys would like to go, they do online courses. Sometimes it's just like, it's a set day and it's via Zoom. Sometimes it's just an online module, and then sometimes it's in person, either in the area or potentially in Chapel Hill. So that's something else that we'll probably be providing you guys some potential opportunities in the future as well.
I know we did one years ago. We did one in Union County, like with other county. Was in Weddington? Yeah. So like it was a shared cost, I think. I don't know who did it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, we can always reach out to the school government and/or
Way in the back, yeah. It's been a while.
Centralina, because Centralina came and did training with you guys last year. You know, it's all kind of contingent upon, you know, where you guys feel what you want to learn or know, or kind of, you know, duties, responsibilities, roles, what you can and can't do, or just other kind of aspects of being a appointed board member. And then it also comes down to what we have on the agenda. I mean, you know, it's one of these things, like, if we don't have much going on, that's something maybe we can, and that's kind of what I wanted to do with a mock hearing. It's just, we're not necessarily going to have time to deliberate land use decisions or applications and then do a mock hearing. So if the opportunity presents itself in the future where we don't have anything on the agenda, I will put a mock hearing on there, but I can't say when. Like, I don't know.
I think for me, I'd love to hear everyone else's opinion, but I'm interested in what are the procedural aspects of it. And I know we have to call it in. I know there's a lot of, I was reading some of the background, and the one site that I was on was very repetitive, and so it was like I was like, yep, you already said that 3 times. You know, trying to get to actually what's the meat, you know, like what's the outline? Is there, you know, just the nuts and bolts of it?
Are you talking about like the structure of a meeting and how everything properly is conducted?
Yes.
So you all will get, we'll do a new rules of procedure, just like we did for planning board. It's not hard. It's really not. You start the
It's-
meeting, you'll declare if any ex parte communication, if you visited the site, if you talked to the applicant, if you had other people advocating for one position or another talking to you, you proceed with your cases in order, and then you discuss any other business. It's a very simple agenda structure.
Okay.
And the only other difference is that would be a scenario where you guys hold a public hearing. Anybody speaking at the public hearing has to be sworn in outside of the board because you guys are already sworn in officers, or not officers, but board members. But I have to be sworn in, and the applicant or any, person wanting to speak. But that would be somewhere, if somebody signs up to speak, question, before they speak, you can, and once again, correct me if I'm wrong here, you can ask them some initial questions to determine if they have standing in the case or not. Or you can just let them speak, but you don't necessarily, after they're done with their 3 minutes or however it's outlined, you can, make a statement like, appreciate that, and the board will then deliberate and potentially, see if that, like, in short, you can convey that it's not an actual necessary factual information that was provided or testimony. It's more of subjectivity and opinion, and therefore you're not going to put this into the evidence for the
So we
minutes.
have
This is
to
also
determine that.
this is also the role of the attorney.
Yeah.
So if someone gets up and speaks, and you're like, I really don't know if they have standing, that would be a good point to ask the attorney, has the information that's been provided to us today, does this show that they have standing? There's a difference between someone saying, this property is going to harm my children versus here's proof that this is going to degrade home values, or this is going to cause X issue in the neighborhood, or it's going to cause flooding, or.
Right, or in the other
It's
case
also-
where you said there was a pond, somebody's going to go up there and say, well, we need to dig it out, clean it up, and then put in a lining so that it doesn't leach into the ground.
Yeah.
That, to me, has standing.
Correct. And that's where, typical standing in the way that it's written in the ordinance is basically, notices, like, we don't advertise, never mind.
We would need to check to see advertising.
I would have to check, but for the most part, you only send adjoining property owners notice, because in theory, somebody who lives across town doesn't necessarily have standing. They're more than welcome to come and try, but if you live across town and you just don't like who maybe the person that has submitted the application or the company, whatever it is, that's not necessarily standing.
Why don't the attorneys vet those folks? Like, why is it us vetting them? Because I think
Once-
that would
it
muddle
depends-
the information.
It's going to depend on the case. I mean, like I said, it's the two variances that came before Board of Adjustment since I've been the planner here were very straightforward. I don't think we had anybody from the public come.
No, we didn't.
However, if you had this big industrial landfill type thing, like, it's going to get stirred up. And so then that's when you may have more people come. And in this specific case, they ended up tabling the meeting. That was jointly, basically a mutual agreement between the Board of Adjustment and the applicant. But that's somewhat of the, stuff that has to be kind of determined, is like, if we had 100 people here up in arms because we're considering something, legally it has to be considered because it's in the ordinance, but, that's where the attorney would then step in and kind of guide through, and that's what we would be here for. And like I said, that's where even the village can hire, an additional attorney or somebody that has qualified witness, and that's, so.
Cool.
All right.
All right, thanks for that. Give a planning update?
Yes, so really the only thing is, just want to mention 2 neighborhood meetings and the rezoning submittals. We've already discussed one tonight, and that one, for that rezoning, the neighborhood meeting is Thursday, February 6th, here at Village Hall from 6 to 8. It's open to the public. The other one is for a rezoning application for the property next door, which is located at 10018 Marvin School Road, right here beside the Preserve and Us. Their rezoning request is from rural residential to Marvin Heritage District, commercial only. Their neighborhood meeting will be held on February 4th here at Village Hall from 6 to 8 p.m. just kind of making you guys aware if you guys would like to come out and, once again, learn about that project or both of them further, and go from there. But that rezoning may be on your February meeting, but once again, that'll be kind of the initial, hey, if you don't come to the neighborhood meeting, you know how we kind of have done this in the past with these conditional zonings, is that first meeting typically is a neighborhood public involvement meeting specifically for planning board, where you ask a lot of questions, potentially the applicant gets some initial feedback from the board, then they revise it slightly, and then the meeting or right after the next one is typically then when you guys make your recommendation.
Okay, but we will have a neighborhood input prior to the submission, or with the submission.
Correct.
So the 4th is next door, and then the 6th is the property we discussed tonight, the zoning.
That is correct.
And I have my national conference the next day, so I will not be able to attend, so.
Well, I'm definitely want to try to get
I'd
the
love it.
6th.
Anything
But,
else?
and that's a good opportunity, like tonight, the applicant / property owner was not in attendance. However, those neighborhood meetings are meetings ran by the applicant / developer. So that's where some of these questions that you asked tonight can also, and then maybe that's a way that we kind of approach it, that there's nothing stopping the planning board from coming to those meetings and asking those questions.
So we can ask those questions?
Yes.
Okay. Again, because
Because you're not, it is a,
representing the planning board, I am a neighbor.
correct. I mean,
There's more than.
you may have, legally, you may disclose, but you're still asking those questions as a resident of Marvin or as a person that's, that has questions on the project. So, and that, like I said, that goes for any rezoning. I always recommend that the applicants hold these before planning board, or once again, because that's kind of what you guys are used to with the old public involvement meeting type procedural stuff. But typically council comes and they do the same thing. They'll either ask questions or they're there to kind of see what questions are being asked, how they're being answered, and then if there's comments, concerns, and then, like I said, this has been on, Marvin Grove, any of that, then how does the applicant potentially take some of those comments received and put it into their request? It's a little different with conditional zoning, so like would be for the case next door, but you still will see some of those questions and potentially other stuff with conventional and how then the applicant amends their application or makes sure that information is presented to, planning board and council. So it's, like I said, good way for all members of the public, council, planning board, whoever, to come and learn about the project, as well as, get the applicant. It's more beneficial for them to get initial feedback, comments, concerns, kind of gauge the temperature, per se, of what's being submitted. So,
Is anyone able to go on the 6th? Or would anyone be willing to go on the 6th and ask those questions? I know you'd
Well,
like to,
I'm
but
trying, yes. I don't see why I couldn't make it. So I know that Angel had a question that I was going to ask as well, the ingress and egress off of Marvin School Road, so yes.
yeah, I'm interested in both, access to both of the
And the
roads.
private roads, right, correct. Which is what, Ravens? I don't see why I couldn't go, so yes.
do you have to do a
Planning
potential
on
form
going.
notice for planning board?
If a quorum of you all will be present, I need to put out a notice for that. It's not a
It's
meeting.
4?
Huh?
Four.
It is 4, yes.
Yeah, so
it
I
looks
think
like
we're good.
You keep it under 3, I don't have to put something.
I know.
All right, so it just looks like Marcus and I at this point. Oh, so then 3 is still below, so that's good.
Yeah. If you plan on attending, just shoot Austin an email.
The other one's on the 4th,
Yes, ma'am.
Which is Tuesday, yeah.
and that's here,
They're both here.
commercial?
It's a rezoning to rezone the property to Marvin Heritage District, commercial only.
That one's going to be interesting because you've got the neighborhood that's already been affected by the rezoning of the Zepsa property. So I'd be interested to see. I think that one's probably going to be hot. That's your neighborhood, right? No, sorry. It's Palumbo's neighborhood.
Well, and that's, like I said, that's, from my experience with the 2 properties I have went through the rezoning for the Heritage District. Well, the second time, the neighborhood meeting was pretty successful. I mean, you did have residents from the preserve that came out, but the first time, they didn't show up till the public hearing. So, like I said, notices go out to all properties within 1,300 feet. Those notices went out last Thursday. So those property owners should be receiving their mail notice in the mail. But it's always encouraged, like I said, because typically what happens is they get this notice, they call and ask questions about it to us, but, you know, at the same time, this is the first step in the process. We haven't fully reviewed what's being submitted. They have submitted a formal application, and it's got to go through the process. So that intent is for residents to come and learn, ask the questions they're asking staff at that time to the applicant developer. Staff is at the neighborhood meetings to present or to provide technical and procedural information, meaning, you know, standard process on what the rezoning entails, you know, kind of outline a rough timeline. But for the most part, when these occur, staff has not fully reviewed, and especially in a conditional zoning standpoint, we have not fully reviewed the submitted site plan for compliance, you know, all aspects of that. So those questions being asked typically need to be asked to the developer for that clarification.
And that one, the one on the 4th, the rezoning is site-specific.
Correct.
And they have to submit an actual plan.
That is
in order
correct.
To be rezoned. Yeah.
Yep, with conditional zoning, once it's being,
That's when we can up and down it without any
Yep.
comment.
can up and down it, and then that site plan gets tied with the rezoning if it's approved. What do you mean? That's, it would be, it'd be for permitted uses outlined in Article 8 for the Marvin Heritage District, which is roughly, you know, I mean, commercial, office, retail type uses, building size and stuff. They're in the process of kind of making final changes to their site plan that will be presented at the neighborhood meeting. But all that stuff, like I said, gets encompassed into the conditional zoning, meaning that uses and such, like if there's certain uses in the Heritage District that staff, planning board, council does not seem fit for that, that can always be recommended to the applicant to prohibit those uses. But once again, with conditional zoning, everything has to be mutually agreed upon. Meaning that if you guys don't want a coffee shop there, the applicant has to agree to prohibit coffee shop and what vice versa. I mean, but when it gets to the specifics of who that use is going to be in certain things, like that's where you can't really, I mean, you're walking a fine line then in getting into, example, Starbucks versus a Dunkin'. But there's, like I said, there's a lot of other aspects of zoning that comes into play there. Size of buildings, drive-through, I mean, all that stuff. So then that kind of then tailors the type of use and or the brand company of the use per se. So, so those questions I would specifically ask the applicant during the neighborhood meeting or even during the planning board meetings.
Anything else?
That's all I got.
All right, well, our only action items are really to review our Board of Adjustments information on our own time. And I think that's it. Are there any action items for you guys? I don't think we had any.
Nope.
Okay. Board member comments? Do we want to?
Nope.
Nope.
Look forward to a successful 2025, people, and working with y'all.
I just want to say personally that I know that staff has had a rough 6 months with personal attacks and things coming at you guys, and shame on neighbors for doing that. You all do excellent work. You have excellent ethics and morals, and I thoroughly enjoy working with you. I trust you, and I appreciate everything that you do, and I really hope that that our neighbors stop making things personal, and I just am sorry for our community. So I just wanted to say that on the record, that we appreciate you guys, and you all do excellent work, and just please keep your head up.
Duly noted and greatly appreciated.
All good, well said. Thank you.
All right. Well, could we get a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Meeting.
All right, so moved. Thank you all. What's that?
We didn't have to
I
thicken
know,
anymore.
it's like boom.